You can see my screen, right?
I can.
Okay, good. Just checking. Ooh, that popped up right away.
Yeah, but you know what I dislike so much about the way that Zoom does its stream is that so on my Zoom on my computer, I can see both of us. We're like
Mhm.
stacked on top of each other. But over here, it's got the
Just the one person up in the corner.
yeah, and I don't I tried to change it to from who's speaking to like everybody, and it never wants to work right.
Sorry.
I don't like that.
Given everything else, I think it's the least of our concerns because at least things work on the regular.
Yeah. Yeah, I
And
know.
also, quick plug for, Stephanie's Dutton shirt. It's really fabulous and soft and stuff. It's that Bella canvas. It's really great.
It is fabulous.
You can find,
Let me go ahead and grab a link to that.
as I say, and you can also find her link always in the description boxes of the videos where she's got other really great stuff. And there's Quilt Nerding merch on there. There's a really cool shirt, and there's more to come. Steph and I just have a lot of fit to-do list, but other things will come.
All right.
Did you put one in the chat?
I just did.
Hmm.
I had to grab
Oh,
it
there it
first.
is. I was gonna say the chat has quite a lag.
I yeah, I think I need to make like a text document just on my desktop with all my links because I'm so bad about that. I'm like, oh, I need to share a link to Instagram or whatever, and I got to go
You
pull it
mean
up.
like on one of those like notes that
Yeah.
sits? Yeah, I used to do that. I'm still pretty organized, but I used to be so much better organized. But I agree with you. I need to get better organized too. That should be like a mid-year resolution to get
Yeah, well,
better
I've been
organized.
saying I'm gonna do spring cleaning since January. It is now a week before July.
When you say spring cleaning, do you mean household cleaning, computer cleaning, what kind of mental cleaning?
All of the above.
See,
I
I think
did.
your problem is you're taking on too daunting of a task. Let's start with like eyebrows.
Well, I started cleaning my desk and I got a new little organizer thing to put the printer on top of so then I have some storage space under. And I'm like, I've put things in there. Why does my desk still look like a disaster? I don't know.
I mean, maybe it's one of those scenarios where you need a bigger desk.
I pretty much need the authority to throw away all things that don't belong to me that get in my way. And because other people's junk takes up space that I need.
That's true. That's true.
As you
Have you
might
just
imagine, my
have you just
husband's not home.
have you just considered a house that's just yours
Yeah, I have. I have.
to put stuff in
Mhm.
and play in and I forget, does your property have enough space for like a big she shed or no? Is your yard too small?
No, I have space in the back.
Hmm.
We have a he shed in the back that has a lawnmower in it. It would not be big enough for my needs if it was cleaned out, but
Can you
it's
fit
well,
another one though?
yeah, well, yeah, we could fit one that's probably 4 times the size. That would be perfect for me.
Well then, I fully support that endeavor.
Something tells me that's not happening in this lifetime, but one never knows. Never say never, I say.
Hmm. People seem to be having a rough time getting in tonight.
Well, while we wait, look what I picked up recently. So, I think I mentioned, when was it? Was it a week before last or last week? Um, I think it was 2 weeks ago. I went to fundraiser for my husband's park. There's a Friends of group and they throw this fundraiser and it's called Cocktails for Trails. And it's a fundraiser and it's a lot of people, like mountain bikers and all the people that come and they're really invested in having the trail, all the stuff. So they always have cool giveaways and stuff. And this way, apparently they've been trying to give these away. They got them from the national parks, I guess. Department of Interior, I assume. Um, and they give them away by the handfuls. It's Smokey Bear.
What is it like a paper doll?
That's a bookmark. But it's the Spanish language version. Ayuda a Smokey en la prevención de incendios en áreas naturales. Only you can prevent forest fires in natural areas.
Not in unnatural areas.
Natural areas are areas with trees. Smokey Bear. You know, he's not Smokey the Bear. He's Smokey Bear. That's his name.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I always thought he was Smokey the Bear.
His legal name is Smokey Bear. And you can actually, I don't know if you guys knew this, hey Janet, you can license Smokey from the federal government. You can license his likeness, and they only have a few rules. Like you can there's a bunch of different versions of him you can use. There's like the original and then the newer looking one. But you basically just have to make a request. And I think that there's a few things you have to do. And I suspect you have to give some money to the National Park Service, but it's not a lot. And yeah, you can license Smokey. I think that's so cool. Like, I think they have to be sure you're not gonna.
This is where we need to think. The more you know.
Yeah, the more you know. I think you have to prove that you're not going to do anything like pornographic with him or something awful. But yeah, and the reason why I found out is I bought for my husband, because he's a park manager and he kind of collects Smokey things and Sasquatch stuff. I bought him these cute little felt pennants, like this kind of thing. Like they're sort of an ornament.
Okay.
And they had Smokey on them, and it was different Smokies. And I was like, oh, I wonder if this guy is like violating some kind of copyright or something. And I looked it up, and I was like, oh my gosh, he's not. He's properly licensed Smokey.
Wow.
So pretty neat. Yeah.
That's so cute. I guess
Yeah.
you're gonna make a Smokey quilt now.
Well, no, I made him a Sasquatch quilt, which has not yet been quilted. I made it like 10 years ago when I haven't quilted it
Oh,
yet.
so I was gonna say it's not the Elizabeth Hartman one.
It is the Elizabeth Hartman one.
That thing's like 10 years old.
I'm 90% sure I made it about 10 years ago. Yeah.
Wow, I didn't think that pattern was that old.
Yeah, it was one of her earlier ones, I think.
Oh.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Well, it's about 10 past. While people are still shuffling in, this is a great time to let everybody know that Stephanie and I, who are on a bunch of American Quilt Study Group committees, are going to be hosting a special live stream all about a seminar in Terrytown this year, which we are also on that committee. Really going through a deep dive into what's being offered this year, what seminars like, especially if you've never attended. We've attended one, and really taking you through kind of the registration process, what that entails, what that's about, and taking away some of the pressure of maybe this being your first time and you not really knowing the ropes and things like that, because we really want you to come, and we're coming, and it's really fun, and it's totally worth your time and your money and your effort, and we don't want people to miss out on things that are really, really awesome. So if you have any questions about that, aside from the agenda we already have, you can send them to us personally or on the Quilt Nerding Facebook or on the Instagram or in our email, quiltnerding@gmail.com. And we're going to spend a whole evening talking about it. And we hope that you're going to come and spread the word.
Yeah, it'll be fun too. I always get excited and sort of pumped up talking about seminar. I feel sort of useless on the seminar committee. I mean, we're on the committee for a specific reason.
You're not, just stop it. Like, you're not, just stop it.
I live in New York. That sounds like a good idea to me. I'm excited about seminar.
You're on the seminar committee because you and I are in charge of the virtual stuff. And
yes, and that's what I said. We're there for a specific reason, but it's, seminars like, I don't know if you guys have ever been involved in like a convention planning and preparation. It's a big job. And
it's a big job, and it's a big seminar. People might think it's this tiny little thing. You guys, when Steph and I went last year, we should have taken video. For one, we were in Kentucky. It was just hot. And we're also just hot people. But we are literally running around, going up to like Mary Kay Walvogel and Barbara Garrett, sweating, and we're like, how do you guys do all this? Oh my God, there's so much going on. I don't know. And they're like laughing at us, like, you learn to pace yourself and you don't try to do everything. And yeah, we tried to do everything, literally everything. Plus, Steph gave a study center. She's also giving one this year. So the nice thing is that because we're on the committee, is we can really tell you how things are really going to go down. But you will have a fantastic time. A bunch of nerds went to Kentucky. There's a bunch of nerds going this year. You have ready-made friends. You don't have to worry that you're walking into a room and you don't know anyone. They were very welcoming to us last year. You know, it was a really great time. So we want to make sure people feel comfortable in going and getting there and registering and all those things. And that's what we're going to do.
Yeah, it'll be fun. So save the juicy details for July 7th. Don't give away more.
Yeah. Okay. So
it looks like Dee Marie. Hey, Dee Marie. Dee Marie has a question. Do either of you have 1 or 2 or 3 quilts that you use on a regular basis? Or Jill, do you store and display? 99% of yours. I don't know. Do you want to answer that?
So I'm guessing we're talking about personal collection, and I'm assuming, Dee Marie, are you asking because you always see quilts behind Stephanie? So for my personal collection, it's in a lot of places. There's some of it in here. What you see behind me is not my personal collection. That is inventory, shop inventory. I don't currently display very well because I just haven't gotten around to doing it. Yes, she's talking about personal collection. I really need to get better at like displaying some stuff. I am going to rig up a system in here so that I can hang a quilt behind me, whether it's my personal or shop inventory or whatever, because I like Stephanie's setup much better than my background. Although I don't know about you guys, I think it's kind of cool to like see all these stacks and stacks of quilts. And that's just what you're looking at is just 2 shelving units. There's more. So I definitely don't have 1 or 2 I use on a regular basis. When the time comes, I guess I'm gonna cycle like Stephanie does.
Yeah, I mean, I do this just because, you know, and what is behind here is it's a broken room divider. It used to be 1 big 6-panel divider, is now 2 3-panel dividers because it broke in half. And so I cover it with quilts because it looks nicer with quilts. And I obviously like to display my quilts. But yeah, you know, the only quilt that I would say is like well, 2 quilts that are kind of in constant use is the one on my bed, which is a vintage-ish quilt. And then one that it's actually a comforter, and it's double knit polyester, like 4-patch kind of thing, and the cats love it. And it's so easy to like clean it. And it's big and poofy and it's soft and useful. And so I have that out constantly because the cats love to lay on it. But yeah, otherwise I just display these. And I have a display wall area too. So yeah.
She says I have a couple I cuddle up with on the couch. I mean, I definitely have other quilts. They're not part of my collection. They're not vintage. They're not antique. They're, you know, imported.
Yeah.
My dog can throw up on it and it's okay. Kind of thing, you know what I mean? Well, I say that because it happened to Sunday this morning. The dog got sick all over his back. Yeah. So let's get going. We're quartering. So let's see, next week is, why don't I always have this date available? Next week is the 2nd. If you're not around because of the holiday, no big deal. Steph and I are going to do our thing and the recording will be waiting for you. So don't worry. So next week, our reading is going to be the sections construction through motifs. And those are pages 36 through 81. It sounds like a lot. It's really not. It's about 20 pages of reading. It's mostly pictures. So don't gasp and be afraid. We're gonna have a lot of pictures to really kind of talk about in terms of like our favorites and stuff like that. And then just looking ahead, the book we're doing after this is Patchwork Pillowcases by our friend Ann Hermes. And we're going to do this similar to how we did things with Dawn. She's going to come on for an interview when we're done. And that is going to be really exciting. Her link to her Etsy is in the description of the last video. It'll end up in the description of this video because she still has copies to sell. So we definitely encourage you to go and support her. And she has some other really cool stuff on her Etsy. So definitely look at that.
I was gonna share the link and now I can't find it.
Well, that's why I didn't volunteer you to share the link. Alrighty.
Once upon a time, I was a pretty good online stream producer. Not so much for my own stuff.
So Crazy Quilts.
Yeah. So before I forget, I had sort of teased the fact that my book came with stuff. And my book belonged to a Mrs. Robert E. Murphy. And she, I guess, was just collecting some info about crazy quilts. The first one is from some kind of catalog. And I tried to do some Google searches, photo searches, and I could not find anything specific. But I have dated this to, I think, like 1985 because of the back of it. And this is like very, JCPenney's 1985.
Yeah.
But
the woman on the side there almost looks like Prince. Like one of the things Prince would wear.
This is what it is, and it is a handmade or hand-stitched crazy quilt. And they have the twin queen and king, and I did the prices because I was like, these were pretty hefty prices for the 80s. The queen size quilt was $380. It's 85 by 95, and the king quilt was $450. And that is 95 by 105. I did the conversion because I was like, those sound like really big prices for 1985, or, and again, I'm guessing 84, 85. $1,100 and
Wow.
$1,300. Yeah. So these, I mean, it's telling me that these are handmade. So I thought that was interesting. And
hey,
then
Janet just pointed out we're bouncing back and forth on view. Can you put us on gallery?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I was trying to get us. There we go. Is that working now?
There we go. Thanks, Janet. She likes to see us both.
Well, and that's why I was complaining about when you're sharing.
Yeah.
Yes, but anyway, so apparently Mrs. Murphy, she golfed a lot because this is the back of one of her calendar pages, and she's golfing all the time. But her calendar had crazy quilts, and she saved it. Yeah, she saved this. I'm assuming, again, it's like as inspiration.
Wow.
And she cut out the little information.
I'm sorry, tell me again, where did this come from?
It was in my book.
Oh, this is part of the junk that was in your book.
Yeah. And then last but not least is the page from the 1981 copy of June 1981 copy of Quilter's Newsletter magazine. And it is a picture of a crazy quilt that somebody made.
Well,
letters to the editor. So that was pretty cool.
Yeah.
I always like to find the things that people, when other people read books, what are they looking at? What are they doing? What are they thinking about?
I found from being in the library, I have found some weird stuff in books.
You've told me about some of the things. And I'm like, oh my God.
It's not a book. Some of it's really not appropriate for live streams, but it's interesting.
And I'm kind of like, check your books before you donate them. Jeez.
Yeah. We've found like nasty things written about people, like
the very author that the book is.
Yeah, like nasty things written about the author, like that we have to like cut out. And I also like, who hates the author that much that they're gonna like write that kind of stuff?
Really weird.
Yeah. Oh, Janet says, got my next book from the author. Always like to support the small business. Thank you so much, Janet. Really appreciate that. Speaking of support, please, everybody, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't, because that really helps us get seen, and that's fantastic for us. Thank you so much. All right, let's get in here.
So the crazy quilt poem in the beginning or whatever this,
Yeah.
I thought it was funny. I started reading it and I was like, oh, and then I realized, oh my gosh, this is from 1890.
I thought it was much more contemporary than that too.
I
I was
did too
really
until I
shocked.
looked at the bottom. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, I was also, it's also another one of those scenarios because it comes from Good Housekeeping, October 25th, 1980. You know how in looking at old needlework publications and things like that, remember when we were like, well, crap, now we got to start paying attention to Country Gentleman, which is also referenced in here quite a few
Yet
times.
another one. And the
Yeah.
delineator.
Yeah, like here I am like thinking, we've kind of honed in, and I wanted to ask you because you peruse newspapers.com, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
Are these magazines on there?
Mm-mm.
No. So is there a magazines database somewhere, do you think? Or do you know?
I don't know. Well, yeah, there are. I think there are some, but I
Hi, Arlene.
don't know of any one specific.
Because
Yeah.
I was
Hi,
gonna say,
Marlene.
like, wouldn't it be so much easier if there was?
Sure would.
And we and we could like look at, and if there isn't, why isn't there?
So what we need, Needle Arts, Modern Priscilla, the Delineator, Country Gentleman.
There's Good Housekeeping,
What's a Prairie Home Companion, Godey's, um,
work basket.
Work Basket. Yeah. So people of the internet, get on that. We need this database. Oh goodness.
Mar
Mary
so,
Ellen
so
Hopkins had
Mary
a
Ellen Hopkins
subscription.
has a subscription to Country Living just to investigate the quilt of the month. I didn't know there was ever quilt of the month.
Gosh, I
I'm
should have known that because my grandmother, she subscribed to Country Living. Oh my God, she had those all over the house.
Isn't that magazine still a thing too? I feel like I've seen it.
It was. I mean, I don't shop for magazines anymore. But yeah, I mean, they sold it at Walmart. I mean, I
Yeah,
don't.
she said there was always a quilt in the magazine. Interesting.
Yeah,
That makes me think like I should go to like a Barnes and Noble and just investigate some of the more modern magazines that aren't quilting magazines
yeah,
specifically, and just
yeah.
see like, do people still talk about that? She saw pretty good quilts in the few that she looked at. And then Arlene said someone had collections of these, need to scan them if copyrights are okay. Quilt Index has a lot of stuff on it.
Yeah,
I've never
Quilt
really
Index
checked Quilt
definitely has.
Index.
Yeah, Quilt Index definitely has some good stuff. I don't think like I mean, the quilters publications you can find. But
Yeah.
yeah, some of these, it's just these general needlework ones. I can't
Yeah,
think of.
these needlework slash probably like women's magazines.
Yeah, yeah, I
Although
can't think of
Country
any.
Gentleman isn't exactly women's magazines.
But you
Next
know what?
thing,
I don't know if I told you when I found out Country Gentleman, I always thought, I don't know, I imagine when I heard Country Gentleman, I'm picturing like country gentlemen riding horses and going sporting and all that stuff. It's actually like the Prairie Home Companion. Like like a for farmers
hmm,
or farm families because I mean obviously it had quilts stuff in it. So um yeah, it was the kind of thing that like farm folks got, just like, those other types of magazines.
farm folks. So do inform everybody your the initial response you gave to me when we got on this Zoom about how you were feeling about this book.
I love this book. This book is so good. Um, and I've heard Penny McMorris speak one time. I think it was online. It's definitely not in person. It was online. And I know she's a big important name, but dang, she's a good writer. And she's obviously a fantastic researcher because this book is so good.
Mhm.
She wrote it in 1984. It was published in 1984. So there are things that are missing from it. But like I'm looking where she's talking about the parts of the book about the criticism of crazy quilts. I was like,
Yeah.
Penny, you missed Dr. Dutton's hatred of them. um but yeah, I mean it's so good, and I've learned so much, and it's got me kind of like noodling around about stuff going, oh yeah, um
No, agreed. I didn't, especially like some of the biggest kind of aha for me was that there were patterns for a lot of the decoration, like the
Yes.
painting and
And
stuff
the
like that.
pictures of the things that people where I think that they were, it was supposed to look like at Prairie Home Companion, a radio show. You're yeah, I think you're right, Jan. There's a magazine that like Prairie Farmer or something. I don't know. You guys know what I'm talking about though, right? Yeah, I don't know.
It could be regional.
No, I think she's right. Prairie Home Companion was like a radio show, but um I love the fact that she defines Crazy Quilt is a little bit wider than I think most people think of.
Hmm.
Um, this idea that some of these like pictorial quilts, I mean, we don't really get them until a little bit later in the book, but these pictorial ones that I've just always just admired so much because there's so much going on in them. And stuff without the fancy ribbons and embroidery, just the plain, very plain stuff. She's also got cobblestone quilts in here as an example of crazy quilting. And I like that broad definition.
So for anyone not totally reading along, the definition she's using is we're talking about this on page 9, Webster's New World Dictionary of American Language, which has the crazy quilt as a quilt made of pieces of cloth of various colors and irregular shapes and sizes.
Mhm.
Period. Not that, not necessarily that has to be embellished, has to be blah, has to be
Or
blah.
that it's silk satin.
Mhm.
Um, and also, was it on this page? I know it's here in like what the first page. What?
Janet said, not many farmers here
Oh, yeah.
tonight, I guess.
Um, the where she mentions plush a lot, and I think
Yeah,
they're using the term plush to mean velvet. And now, so then I got to thinking today, and I didn't have time to look it up, but like, when did the word velvet come into play? When do we start using velvet for silk plush?
interesting, because that's not immediately where I went with that, because there is a picture of
There's the embroidery plush work. Yes.
well, no, that's what I thought of first, but then the
Uh-huh.
picture on page 14,
Hmm.
the unusual quilt on this bed is made of small stuffed squares.
Uh-huh.
Half of me wondered like if that was the scenario she was talking about. So now when I think
No.
about it, if it's velvet work, that kind of makes sense
No,
of what
I
I
think where
read.
she said there's a couple places where she says plush, and I think she's quoting. They're not her words, she's quoting. And this is terrible. When I started reading, I wasn't doing my annotations like I usually do, and I did them later. Um, but she does it, she's quoted and they'll say silk and plush.
Oh,
So,
yeah, done, yeah.
she's talking about like
Context clues,
the
yeah.
fabric. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Context clues. I love that. That takes me back to like fourth grade reading.
Do you know how many times in college that we had to go over context clues? Like context matters.
It does.
Um,
Um, I love her bringing up Ruth Finley and all of the inaccuracies that Ruth Finley
of course.
perpetuated, because this is not the only one, but this is one that I think I remember, I mean, I do remember obviously reading this, but I think I remember thinking to myself, like, I don't think this is accurate, but I don't know enough about crazy quilts to know one way or the other. Um, but yeah, crazy quilts are not a colonial thing. So
It was interesting though. I have never really considered the possible origin being Japanese.
yeah,
Um,
and that's also something where I was like getting my mind going. Before we get to the Japanese influence though, the where she talks extensively about using the word crazy, and of course how people go like, "Oh, it's crazy," but that it may have possibly come from crazing.
mhm.
Crackles in
Yeah.
porcelain, in which, goes the Orientalism obsession of the time as well. So it's really interesting, kind of wonder like who first used the term crazy quilt or crazy patchwork, because I think they called them crazy patches
Mhm.
back then. And yeah, and like what was that person thinking? Or, when they started using that word, were they thinking like crackly pottery, or were they thinking crazy?
Well, given that she's mentioning again you know, like the crazy, like going back to like the Japanese influence there, where she's mentioning the exposition there in Philadelphia in what was it, 1876 or something. And that was the first time Americans were really exposed to, you know,
Yeah, yeah. And you know,
Japanese
Orient,
things.
yes, the whole idea of like that Orientalism did come out of the world, the expositions, and I think she mentioned the one in London, or the earlier one in London.
Yeah.
But a lot of it was like they, I mean, it's like a game of telephone, and they assume that like, oh, well, you know, Japanese people must be living like savages, and then they find out, oh, they're not. Well,
Yeah.
you know, maybe we could do something with this.
Janet asked about the velvet talk. Was
Yeah.
velvet back then silk? The stuff
Yes.
today is mostly rayon.
Yeah, it was generally silk back then. I'm trying to think if there was any other kinds of velvet. I'm pretty sure it was all silk back then. Yeah, the rayon and the modern, like the polys, that's very modern. That's 20th century. Before, and I actually have some pieces of silk velvet, and oh my God, it's like, oh.
Wow,
It is
I can just
so,
picture, is that what you do before you go to bed? Like,
well, somebody, I was collecting some scraps, much like the ladies who made crazy quilts. You know, it was one of those like quilter's wish things I did at one time on Instagram. This has been a number of years ago. I think it was before the pandemic. And I did not expect anybody to respond. I was like, this is a long shot, but I'm looking for some, you know, small pieces of suiting fabrics and, you know, like corduroys or whatever. And somebody sent me like the lion's, and I know I've had to get rid of some of it because it was so much, but it was corduroys and suiting fabrics and just all kinds of stuff. And there were several pieces of real silk velvet in there.
wow.
And I was like, oh, of course I kept those. And I just every now and then, they're so soft.
You're one of a kind, aren't you?
I sure am. Now here's the interesting thing about the Japanese influence, because they, you know, this idea of things being kind of wonky, like not like the not perfection, that concept in Japan, and you know, I don't know. I mean, I think it's an old concept, and she doesn't refer to it here because it almost doesn't make sense in this context. But the idea of wabi sabi, which is, you know, like like embracing imperfection. You know, there's that where, you know, like something is broken, like a vessel is broken, and they'll repair it, and then the broken lines, they'll put gold gilt on it.
Yeah.
Like that whole idea of like embracing perfection, and it's beautiful. But wabi sabi is not. Wabi sabi is also that kind of austerity, the Japanese aesthetic of austerity. It's not perfect, but it's not like a crazy quilt. And so that's the part of it I was kind of like, huh. It's like they embraced part of this Japanese aesthetic, and then they were like, but it's not Victorian enough. So let's like cram as much other crap in there as we can.
Well, that would be the Victorian part. Like when we're looking at the pictures here in people's rooms, I was like, wow, does that mean that right after the Victorian era was over, we had the same issue we have now, where a bunch of millennials are minimalists because they grew up packed with stuff? Although I am a millennial, but I am not a minimalist. But yeah, like while I love this salon, although I could without the leopard skin rug, a lot of people I know would probably cringe at how much stuff is in the salon. Sure. Not me, because like more is more, but
well, I always think of, you know, when I see these pictures like this, I always think of the Addams Family. They had like the quintessential weirdo Victorian home with, you know, like elephant's foot umbrella stand and those little ashtray things like everywhere, and you know, animal skin rugs and chandeliers and all sorts of just crap everywhere. And these people, the Moultons, they definitely seem to have embraced the full Victorian decorating.
Well, especially too, like you know, transitioning into this idea of it being this like fancy work. Janet says she was thinking the same thing about the amount of stuff. Well, so they took that amount of stuff and were like, let's translate that to fabric. And how much stuff, although I mean it's not a rule, because we see obviously crazy quilts that have far less, you know, embellishment than others do. But this idea of, you know, this fancy work, especially kind of like taking maybe less aesthetically pleasing fabrics and making them, you know, fancy through this embellishment. You know, when we get into further in where it talks about, you know, these farming communities and they're like, I don't want silk and velvet. Like it doesn't fit here. I'm going to fancy up muslin and, you know, cottons and things like that, which why not? Um, I find that interesting, especially the kind of idea later in here of like the fabric scraps and the thrift part of it. And the Jordan Marsh you know, fabric box of scraps, and no two are alike. That made me, there was a Jordan Marsh down the street from my house growing up, and half of me was like, did they have those then? Probably not.
So that's a department store, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like a JC Penney, like a JC.
Yeah, we don't have those. We didn't have those around here. So, and speaking of fancy work, I love how, I mean, there's this idea like they're bringing in the artistic, you know, the arts. And it's so ironic that so many people look at this era and this type of, you know, not just the needlework, but just everything as being like horrible, overwrought, you know, crazy Victorians stuff. Yet this is where we're starting to see, you know, arts applied to what women do. It's so ironic because it's like the actual stuff itself is in many cases looked down upon, you know, especially if it's not well executed. But you know, these, you know, I guess magazines and stuff are applying the word art.
Yeah.
And we haven't seen that before. And it's like, of all the things you're going to stick the word art on, it's got to be some, you know, seashell encrusted macaroni art, right?
Well, it's kind of like we go on to this thing, right? Because we also have at this period, you know, that idea of the make do. So this is somewhat of a make do to a certain extent if you're going to use all those scraps. And it's like make do, but fancy it, you know, like fancy work the make do. And almost like take, I don't know, kind of like take a bigger pride in your make do, I guess. For lack of a better way to say it, because like they really went all out. I did not realize getting into the decorating part. Now we've talked about this before because I'll have to dig it out for the next one, but I recently bought a Victorian trade card that has a crazy quilt fabric patch on it you're supposed to remove and put into your crazy quilt work. So I just didn't have time to dig it out tonight.
Have you showed me that one? I don't know.
I think I showed you.
Okay.
But I don't think I put it in the unboxing I did because I wanted to show it for this. But remember we were talking at one point, like, are these pre-made? Are they this? And it turns out it's a mixture of both. I didn't realize though that they went so far as to do things like perforated patterns.
Yeah, and kids.
Yeah.
I mean, who knew? I mean, the things I have learned here are just, I just always assumed that the crazy quilt was all of the garment scraps and, you know, any kind of silk and satin finery that you could get your hands on, and you just threw it all together. And some people were real good at it and some people weren't, but everybody wanted to do it, you know? And that's really not it. And but I did notice it's you know, maybe she gets into this later or maybe she just didn't really emphasize it, but neckties, I have so many times seen historical mentions of how in jeopardy neckties were because of crazy quilts. Because people, you know, if a necktie, I guess, was stained, worn out, whatever, women would try to solicit them from their male relatives to put in crazy quilts. And that became kind of like a trope around crazy quilts, was like, men, safeguard your neckties, you know. She did mention it in here that neckties were part of the equation. So again, so talking about money, because I wanted to do the conversion for the 1984 thing. I did the conversions for 1880. I know they said, I think she said 1884 was kind of like the pinnacle. So 1880 seemed like a nice round number. When she's talking about the fabric scraps in the Jordan Marsh fabric scraps, but that was $1 for that 300 pieces. That's approximately $27 today, $27.50. That's kind of a bargain. you know, in terms of buying power.
Yeah, when we think of what like a charm pack is,
Yeah.
what now, like 12? Is it like
A
12?
charm, well, it depends. I would say it, modern 5-inch charm pack usually has like 40 or so prints. Sometimes
And
it's
sometimes
less.
it's two of each.
Yeah.
They're not all different.
Right. But you're ending up with 40 pieces of fabric
Sure,
approximately.
sure.
Those sometimes they retail for about $12, $15,
Mhm.
sometimes more. We're talking 300 here.
Well,
And
and
it's
again,
silk, it's
like
not
that,
cotton.
the modern charm pack is a particular fabric line. It's not
Yes.
like
Yes.
a
It's not
big bag of
random.
scraps. Yes, I'm just trying to think, like, does anybody do like a scrap thing like that anymore? I know people sell bags of scraps, but I mean
Yeah.
kind of like these are, come in a box.
Hmm.
So they're all, let's say, 5-inch
Well,
squares.
I mean, I think that, well, pre-cuts. Um, Janet, thanks for wrecking my idea that they were starting to let women let
Yeah.
women's work be called art. Yeah, yeah.
Well, I mean,
Lots of stuff was.
yeah, they had the morning art with the hair and the this
I
and
have to
the
say, some of the hair stuff is very pretty, and some
until
of
you find out what it is.
well, now
Like from afar, you're like, whoa, oh.
I actually learned a lot. I took a class in how to make some of that stuff and the history. And it is just as interesting as this. It is not what you would expect.
All right, everybody, you heard it here first. Send all the hair from your hairbrush to Stephanie so she can practice.
Mm-mm, mm-mm. Nothing grosses me out, squicks me out more than other people's hair.
Can you
I bought,
imagine though if you opened up your PO box?
my God, and envelopes of hair came out, I would disown all of you. I'm
Yeah,
just
Jenna,
kidding, Janet.
it was, I mean, don't get me wrong. I love the Victorian period. Just
They did some gross stuff.
but one of the reasons I love it is because it's weird.
Yeah, yeah.
It's
Hmm.
just odd. Like, don't even get me started on like Victorian medical stuff. Just
Oh,
like,
yeah.
did you see? Did you see Steph's eyes get all big? Like,
Did you ever watch the show Oddities? It was on, I think it was on Sci-Fi for a while.
maybe.
Sci-Fi. It was based on, there's a shop in New York. They closed down. I want to say it was before the pandemic, a while before the pandemic, but they were called Oddities. And they were that kind of place that you could go in there, you could buy a straitjacket or some medical paraphernalia or some weird Victorian art or just taxidermy, like all kinds of weird stuff. You know those places.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, they did a show out of there, and it was very cool because they would,
Hmm.
talk, and they would give the history of stuff. And yeah.
Interesting. Interesting.
Um,
And we would call it art.
yes, and indeed it was a weird time, and it was weird is good. Weird is good.
I also hadn't considered the fact that, a little bit of the crazy quilt phenomena made its way overseas.
I did not realize that either. The English, and I mean, when I think about it, I'm like, I have seen this kind of stuff. I guess I just never really gave much thought to it.
Mm-hmm.
And when like, oh, that's an English example of, it just never.
Well, and I wonder if part of the reason is because before opening this book, I feel like we were working from probably a more narrow
Yes,
interpretation
definitely.
of what, would constitute, not considering, you know, like regional examples and styles and things like that. So, I mean, that would make a lot of sense. And it's also one of those moments like, well, duh. Like, did you feel like that at one point? Like, oh yeah, why? Of course, other people would be making this stuff like that. Um, I thought that this little blurb here from the Girls Own Paper magazine, those whose time is much occupied with household matters and who cannot devote much time to the task of making their drawing rooms pretty, we recommend to try Crazy Patchwork. The work is one of least expensive that can be tried and can be put down without derangement of effort at any moment.
Derangement of effort. I guess they're saying is like it is so crazy anyway that You know, if you stop in the middle, it's no big deal. It's not like you have to make a note of how many stitches you counted.
You know, that reminds me too. Is it earlier on? Where did I write about it? Um, I think it's earlier on where, oh no, wait, it's not. It's where people hate crazy quilts.
Mhm.
And they talk about the reason they hate it on page 25 is because it deranges your eyesight.
Yeah.
And I was like, why would crazy quilting hurt your eyesight any more than any other kind of patchwork does?
Yeah, I did make a note there. We'll get there in a second. Because there's some stuff in between there that I want to mention. Um, yeah, Dee Marie, I mean, same thing. I just, you know, I mean, I like the fact that Penny McMorris really took this, like, embraced all of these different things. And it's not that, you know, just when you think about what a crazy quilt looks like, it's more than that, you know. Um, so some more of these things where they're talking about the price of things. On page 20 under embroidered appliques, where you could buy these pre-embroidered things, you talk about a 4.5-inch single rosebud with 3 leaves could be had for 50 cents. A 16-inch rose spray made up of 2 open roses and 1 half open rose, blah, 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 blah. All these different colors was $6.
Yeah,
Well, you know how much $6 was worth in 1880?
a lot of money.
Yeah, I found, and it feels like the farther you go back, those inflation calculators get a little bit not quite good, but I found numbers between $150 and $190. So that's a lot. And but you think about some of the like, I don't know, gadgets and things that we go crazy about today. You know, think about, you know, a box of Aurifil, like all the colors for, you know, one particular designer's little palette. Those are like, you know, anywhere between $100 and $200. You know, we'll buy these big fat quarter stacks. Those are
Yep.
sometimes, you know, $100, $200. So I'm like,
Yep.
yeah, people, you know, and I don't know that was necessarily even people that were wealthy or had extremely disposable income. I think you could even be talking about probably not working class, but middle class-ish people. And I realized the middle class didn't really exactly exist the way it does today. Does it exist today? But you know what I'm saying. I think people who still were not of insane means could splurge on something, you know,
Yeah,
if
that's
they
true.
save their pennies. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the
Or
ribbon.
maybe even split the cost
Mhm.
between
Yeah.
a couple of friends or something like that.
Yeah. And then the ribbons where you could get 25 pieces of ribbon for 50 cents. That's about $14. You know, and that again, I mean, this I'm thinking to myself, somebody who's really gonna go all out, they might be spending this kind of money, and they aren't necessarily like ultra wealthy people. You know, and that's just my assumption here. So I think we talked about the English crazy. Okay, so on pages 22 and 23, first of all, those slippers are freaking cool.
Will you be making a pair?
Probably not. You know, it's like, again, it's my 8th day in the week project, but they are cool. And then this whole thing about the crazy tea. I'm like, what? So this strikes me as the kind of thing that one weirdo wrote about in this magazine, and this sort of thing does not really exist. Like, nobody really did this, or one person did it. Like, who would be throwing salted lemonade parties? And you have to sit on the floor because the lamps are all on the chairs. You know, I mean, it's just insanity. The food alone, I'm like, why would you make all this food? Like, it, I mean, baked beans with currant jelly, cornbread and cheese frosted with chocolate icing, tarts stuffed with chow chow, and hot salted lemonade. Like, that's not just crazy. That is insane.
Should we try that as like one of the experimental archaeology things that we do?
No. I do love interesting flavor combinations, but I can tell you right now, I don't want any of that. Hot salted lemonade might be good if you really need your electrolytes. Well, that's about it.
It sounds gross. To me, lemonade has to be cold.
Yeah.
On
And
on
then
a
you have,
on a side note, Mr. 56K Connections has pointed out our 100 subscribers that we have reached, which is quite a milestone. But for anyone that isn't currently subscribed, we need 500 to be able to do any monetizing, which we do have to get to a point of doing any monetizing to keep this going, because you do need some funds to fund some of the things that we want to do. So
yeah.
just a little aside there, and 56K Connections is my honey sweetie. So thank you, honey sweetie.
He's always slipping in here under different names. So Deemer, it sounds like a lot of money. It does sound like a lot of money. Yeah, it does. But also I think about the things that friends of mine who are, diehard quilters and, and people on fixed incomes that will still say, I really, 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 really want to make this quilt, or I want to put this thing in my quilt, or, whatever. And they will like make that big splurge. And so, and again, in my mind, I'm thinking people don't change that much. So that was just where my mind was with that. But yes, that's a sound Dolly crazy. Absolutely. Hot salted lemonade. I'm that Salvador Dali had it every night with dinner. Okay, so the eyesight situation.
Wait, before we get to that,
Oh,
hold on.
sorry. Oh, yes.
Yeah, on 24 there, you need to
24,
address
I
the
almost
crazy
forgot.
fabric.
You guys, so I did show this the other day, but you may not have really noticed. I purchased for my burgeoning little vintage cheater fabric collection some Victorian era cheater fabric. And this is just one of the pieces. I suspect that these pieces came from like they were drapes or something, curtains. I don't know. They're pieces. Some big pieces in this strip. But this is what's on page 24. It is this fabric. And I'm looking to see. I think this piece doesn't have the little boy roller skating.
Do you have the spider in the web?
Yeah, it's right here.
Oh, it's pink.
Oh, and yeah, like there's the fan and the bird.
That's cool.
Try to see. There's a really pretty little butterfly. I I think this strip just doesn't have all the cool stuff.
I really like the ad page too for crazy cloth.
I know. I love that too. That was really neat. But yeah, this fabric is just so cool. And I had this book for a while and I did look at all the pictures in it, even though I had not read it yet. And then I bought this fabric recently and was smacking myself in the head when I was reading this last night because I was like, oh my God, there's my fabric. And I'm thinking to myself, I probably saw this because I looked at the pictures, a year ago or whatever when I got this book, and it's just stuck in my subconscious, I guess. And then when I saw it on eBay.
I will say the fact that this picture is black and white, it doesn't automatically look like the fabric you bought. But there is another book that I feel like one of the ones that we read that might have had that fabric in a color picture.
Yeah, it's a possibility. And I'm just thinking, she doesn't give, so she gives the date, but she doesn't give any specifics about like what, who made it? Like, was there a company that we can attribute this to? I don't know, but it seems like it was probably pretty popular. We've seen it and I was able to buy some, for
yeah, I think I've seen that fabric in like a more blue colorway.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it maybe came in some other colorways too. So this is Sycophus's pillow is really beautiful, by the way, and the little box that came in.
What an unfortunate last name.
I think it's a cool name. Like, what a weird name. And I'm trying to think.
It sounds a little too close to sycophant to me, which is not a good word.
I'm trying to think. I've heard that name before attached to something, and I cannot for the life of me think of what it is or where I've heard that name before. I don't think I've heard it having anything to do with quilts. It was in some other part of my life I heard that name. But I just think it's a interesting name. It's a
maybe in your genealogy work.
Possibly. Yeah, possibly. Um, the Miriam Shapiro piece, I think, is pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
And I know back, when Mary was Mary Fawn's, Quilt Nerd, I know she looked at several Miriam Shapiro pieces, and
Mm-hmm.
her work is very crazy quilty.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I'm trying to think, it just occurred to me, was Miriam Shapiro one of the women that was involved with the artist in the quilt? Or am I imagining that?
Maybe.
I feel like she might have been. She was involved in something where it was one of her other quilts that recreated or was influenced by something Victorian.
Mm-hmm.
It was like a heart or something and like floral. That I can see it in my mind. And I can't remember what it was attached to, but I do remember that was Miriam Shapiro.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
I found the conclusion kind of interesting on this chapter that um she kind of says that she thinks there's a crazy quilt revival going on.
in
Um,
1984, there was.
no. She's talking about like she wrote this in, I'm sorry, what did you just say? 1984?
She wrote this in 1984.
And you really feel like it was having the same fervency as the Victorian period? Really? I don't really agree.
Yeah, I do. Because my mom was heavily involved in quilting at the time this book was written, and maybe it wasn't like the Victorian fervor, but
Mhm.
yeah, people were doing crazy quilting stuff. Yeah, there were is it Judith Baker Montano, I think. um and I'm trying to think, there was somebody else that wrote books on all of the different kinds of ribbon embroidery and crazy quilt stitches. I
Mhm.
have the Judith Baker Montano book. It was a resurgence of.
But was it a I guess what I'm thinking is like, was it just a resurgence of crazy quilting, or was it just part of the generalized like resurgence of actual quilting?
It was well, I mean, quilting was getting very popular again in the 80s from
Mm-hmm. Right,
70s.
that's when my mom started.
Yeah, and but yeah, crazy quilts, like the concept of crazy quilting, like yeah, absolutely. Um
Because like
I'll
this
have to,
Miriam
yeah.
Shapiro here, I would not look at that and really think a ton of crazy quilt inspiration. It does not give me that vibe.
Right. Well, and I think it's the broader definition that Penny McMorris is sticking to, that kind of where she's looking at these modern pieces and kind of making that parallel around the broader definition. But when I think of 1980s people recreating crazy quilts, we're talking like floofy, lacy, Victorian. Bleh. um,
It almost looks to
yeah.
me like almost a totally different category. I guess I have to really, I never look at them and think about crazy quilts. I just look at them and think that's a 1980s bedazzled. You know what I mean? We're getting to the age of
Yeah,
bedazzlement.
I'll have to, you know, I have to dig around and find some stuff, but I actually have a picture of a quilt block that my mother made in a Marianne Fawn's class that is a crazy basket. It's your
Hmm.
standard basket,
Hmm.
the with the little
Hmm.
triangle foot and the handle. And the basket itself is like a sort of crazy quilt.
Hmm.
There was just that there was this aesthetic that that era in the 80s, people really loved this Victorian kind of um interpretation. Let's call it that. They were in the same way that people love to make quilts that are like, or they love reproduction 30s fabrics, and you know, they love feed sacks, and they love the idea of all that stuff. And so, but what it turns out to today is not exactly, and they kind of not misinterpret me. Well, they kind of misinterpret it in a way. Um, I think that's kind of the way the crazy quilting thing was going. But yeah, absolutely. I think when she wrote this book for a very good reason. And it was because people were nuts about crazy quilts.
Hmm. Hmm.
Oh, and the painted stuff. I actually have, and I thought about it like too late because I have to go digging. It's in some stuff that's in storage, but I have a piece of this painted, preparing to put it in a crazy quilt. It's a block. It is ugly as sin, but it's this I bought a crazy quilt and the guy threw it in. Like he was like, here,
Oh, okay.
take this piece of crap too. But it's black velvet in this painted floral like flower thing. And it's got to be oil paint because it's kind of thick and gloppy. And at
On
first I thought,
fabric?
yeah, yeah. And at
Really?
first I thought, oh God, was this somebody like with their, crappy acrylic paint trying to make something? And then as I really was looking at it, I was like, this is old. This is not. I mean, at first I was really sure that it was something more modern that somebody had been trying to approximate, but I think it's old. The fabric is definitely old. So
Mm-hmm.
I'll have to dig it out for next week because
I was gonna say
it's
if it's
just
all like heavy and gloppy like that, I'm surprised the fabric could really hold up to that.
oh, it's velvet.
They
So it
painted I oh Angel, okay. So I feel like some of the velvet pieces I see that are painted, we don't actually see the paint anymore. We see the remnants of the paint that has come off. So maybe
yeah,
you're actually seeing the original remnants of the paint.
yeah. Yeah, you'll when I show you, you'll get it.
So Janet says, I do remember crazy quilt cheater fabric in the 80s, but not actually doing it. I did do a lot of toll painting,
hmm
sponge painting during that time. Oh my God, my mom did a bunch of sponge painting.
Yeah, my mom did.
And
Yeah,
stenciling.
the stencil, the sponge stencil. Oh, my living room is still sponge painted. My husband loves sponge painting.
Oh, I did some sponge painting like in my first apartment because I like sponge painting too, but like the amount of stencils I have from my mom's stencil painting, like
And
everything,
it's all things like little cows and little bunnies and little
every
hearts.
everything. She did
Those
tote bags,
are there
everything.
geese? There've got to be geese.
There gotta be what?
Geese.
Geese, like
They're
the birds?
geese, yeah.
I don't know if there's geese.
Oh, my mom definitely had some
She
geese
did
stuff.
ducks.
Okay.
It's like a big like duck thing. Maybe. I'll have to look. I'll have to look. Lots of hearts, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, lots of stuff. I mean, the amount like so on look, I hate books that don't have pages and numbers on every page. So on 30 to 31, yeah, 30 to
Mhm.
31. Oh my God, the stitches.
I know.
Like
Um,
half of me, Steph, please don't hate me. But half of me wonders if like maybe for one of our like little like experimental project things, we should do like a little crazy quilt square and do a bunch of embroidery stitches.
oh, I would do that. I love them.
Okay,
Yeah.
good. Here I
Yeah, I
was
love
thinking you
stuff
were
like
gonna be
that.
like, shut your mouth. Don't you say anymore.
Yeah. And I'll be honest, I've never actually made any like legit crazy patch thing. Like, I've done some improvisational piecing, but I've never made anything like this. So yeah,
I have made stuff like a crazy quilt in the patch form in cotton though. I'm wondering if maybe like we should do it in like real like
yeah, I mean I have some silk fabric. I have a little box of like nice silk fabric and it's like kimono fabrics and stuff like that. And I could probably pull out my precious little piece of real silk velvet.
we could probably get some. Um
But yeah,
Arlene
these
says her
are
favorite
great.
Christmas tree skirt is on it's stenciled in the mid 80s. I want to see a picture of that, Arlene. You need to send girlfriend a photo.
Yes, I think we
But
need
yeah,
to.
would anyone join us if we did something like that? Like would that potentially be kind of like you don't have to do it in like reproduction kind of stuff. Like we're doing this a little more experimental, but like that might be kind of fun to do. Put that on the laundry list of other things that we want to do.
When we're finished with our batting, yeah, we should do this.
Hmm.
Um, so well, so first of all, I love these spreads of the embroidery stitch patterns, and it was
Yeah.
funny. And I think she said, companies like did they just copy each other? Did they all share? Like, who knows? I discovered really through some of my research that a lot of magazines and newspapers like really didn't care about copyright or anything. They'd be like, that looks good. We want it too. We'll just take it. you know?
I think it's
So
probably a little column A, a little column B. Hey Jen, you little lurker, you. She says she's
Jen,
got the Judith Montano book and she's always wanted to make a block. So Jen, you've just signed yourself up there, girlfriend.
um, yeah, but I love all these, and I know that she references some of these on the next page, I think, in these patterns for quilt block designs. And I love the
Mhm.
fact that these things, again, the supposition is that they were probably just for an example, but that people literally made them.
Mhm.
Like on page 33, that top one, and then I was looking at it and I was like, oh yeah, yeah, there's the circle with the zigzag through it, and there's
Yep.
that diagonal piece, there's the moon.
Yep.
And
Well, and
I
it makes me wonder how many times now have we seen these things? Like I've noticed like some of like the like painted owls and things that we've seen. Like I thought someone was just really
thought,
talented. Lo and behold, oh nope, they followed a pattern. I mean,
well,
don't get me wrong, they can still be talented and follow a pattern. But I thought people were just making stuff up as they went along. I thought like the stitches were probably, regular embroidery stitches they're learning somewhere,
right. Yeah.
but that like people were just painting stuff. And now I've seen that
Well,
same owl multiple times.
yes, yes. And I knew that they were using embroidery patterns. Like I
Hmm.
knew that stuff was out there because I mean, I just have enough old embroidery stuff. Um, like I have a pink work. It's like red work, but it's pink. And there are patterns in there that I have seen on Crazy Quilt. So they were standard like iron on or trace it and do the prick and pounce method. So that wasn't a surprise to me necessarily. And she also mentioned like sometimes you'll see like a little tiny motif and then this giant thing.
Yeah.
And that makes sense if you're just going along and saying, "Ooh, I like that. Ooh, I like that. I like that. I'm going to trace these things." I got the gist of that. But again, I'm thinking crazy quilts are taking all your scraps and maybe getting scraps to make this thing. To make one that looks exactly like the picture, I'm like, that is not using your scraps wisely. That is resorting to making an ugly thing with good fabric, in my opinion. Now, I think these blocks are very beautiful. I
Mhm.
really like what they did, but I'm like, why? Why did you copy this? This was, this may not have been meant to be copied. It's just so funny to me.
It seems like a great practice for doodlers,
Hmm.
for people like if someone's just like, hey, you like to doodle, like doodle me up a pattern of things like a Mary Witherwax. I think she potentially would love to doodle along, like, this circle with the lightning strike. I think potentially she's the kind of person that would draw something up like that.
Yeah.
um or even just like thinking to put like music notes into your like embroidery stitches or something like that.
Yeah, and I think the embroidery examples are very cool. Like a music, a bar of music, or what do you call that? A line of music. I'm not musical, you guys. But that little stretch of sheet music, that is a very effective thing to stick in a long, skinny strip. So I
Mhm.
think I love all of those ideas. It's just so funny that like people actually made them, you know. Um, one thing that because we're kind of at the end of this section, that I didn't mention, but the six know-it-alls, and I don't know if this particular episode is, I mean, they're all available, but I think you have to pay for this one. There were a few at the beginning and they are free, but
Mhm.
Barbara Brackman, and then later on, I think Mary Kay Waldvogel, she talked to me about it some, so I don't know if she was doing any kind of, research or whatever, but they had looked at what I think they call them slips, and they are like pieces of embroidered fabric that you could buy. They're pre-embroidered, they're machine embroidered, or like when I talked about what $6 means, those were the hand embroidered on net stuff. But those pieces that were machine embroidered, I think Barbara figured out that they were being used in other places, like fancy boots that were like had covered in silk that would use those embroidered slips along the sides of the boots. And so
Oh.
there were multiple industries that were utilizing this stuff. So you could buy like a piece of fabric, a strip of fabric that already had that embroidery on it.
Mhm.
Um, and I have a crazy quilt, and I had sort of thought, oh, some of the embroidery on it was so good looking that I was like, it has to be machine, it has to be some kind of industrialized. And so I had told Mary Kay, I was like, oh, I thought I had this. And so she said, hey, would you, could we look at it? And I pulled it out and I was like, no, this was just good embroidery. I was like, that's crazy. I'm disappointed that this was good hand embroidery because I really wanted my quilt to have those machine made things. It
You know,
didn't.
you just reminded me that not too long ago, I made a house call to a woman that was selling a crazy quilt. Um, and of course, thought it was, you know, something really, really important. But it had some really interesting things on it. Maybe I should get that out and take some close-ups of some things because it was very pretty.
Yeah.
And we can look at that. And don't forget too that when we're done with this book, we're going to look at crazy quilts that the New England Quilt Museum has on display right now to go along with their Stitch Punk exhibit. Which I haven't forgotten about. I know people want to see things from that. I think that kind of does it for us tonight. Does any other things you want to add?
No, I was just reading Dee Marie's comments, ugly things with good fabric. I see it in the same improv today. Yeah. You know, and actually it was so funny. I was watching Mama is a Fan on Twitch. She is one of my fellow Twitch streamers who does quilty stuff, but she actually teaches quilting techniques. And she was working on some crumb piecing today. And you know, crumb piecing is like it's very popular. But as she was talking about, well, you know, you can make these really big pieces. You could make a whole quilt if you wanted to. She was starting to talk about, you know, as you're putting this together, kind of looking at the composition of it and also the thickness of some of the seams. And she had suggested, I think what she's planning on doing is making 5-inch ones, you know, like, and she's using a paper foundation to kind of keep them the right size. And then she said, yeah, I think I might, you know, alternate them with solid blocks. And as she was doing that, and I'm doing my reading, she was keeping me company while I was doing my reading. I was like, she's essentially making modern day crazy blocks.
Yeah, I've got a quilt that's crumb pieced.
Yeah. And, you know, I think that whole idea of, you know, just these small pieces and improv, and it's not new. You know, we think of it as being new, but the whole idea of being kind of random or utilizing what you have, that make do, but making it interesting and pretty, it is not new. You know, it's just kind of taken on a different twist and a different look. So yeah, absolutely.
Well, and everything looks different in different fabric.
Yeah, and there, you know, people aren't doing it with silk and satin and plush. But yeah, Dee Marie, yeah, that pieces of embroidered fabric. Yeah, I was, you know, not shocked, but I was really surprised and fascinated by the fact that, you know, that was there and people were using it. And, you know, it's smart. If you don't have time to embroider, but you have the money to buy that stuff and you want to make something that, you know, I mean, think of all the kind of crafty things we do that with today. You know, you buy ready-made things, you buy, you know, half-done things.
Cheater cloth. Hey, you know, technically, like you could just take a piece of the cheater cloth you got and just add the embroidery stitches over the printed pieces that's already there.
Yeah, the printed embroidery stitches. Yeah. Yeah, no.
No, but I'm saying like you could do that if you didn't have time to like patch, you know, do patchwork, but you wanted to bedazzle it with the stitches.
Yes, I might could do that with some of my sunbonnet Sue crazy because I do have some sort of quasi crazy cheater cloth that has sunbonnet Sue's on it. But yeah, this 1880 86-ish. It's gonna go right back into its safety bin.
I'm pretty sure you can find that or something very similar that's printed today.
Yeah, I'm sure I could
do that on. Yeah.
But I was gonna say I have a number of crazy quilts. They are absolutely not showpieces. They are in horrible condition. But I really bought them to study them and look at them and kind of sort of, you know, the construction. And the one that I have that is the grandest, 1884. So height of the crazy quilt fervor. And it, you know, there's so much about it that I think I think it was made by more than one person. I think it was multiple hands. Obviously people that they were jumping into this trend, but they use cheap silk because half of it is shredded. It's just, you know, the silk is so shredded. There was some very, very good work in it, like stitch work. There's also some bizarre and bad stitch work in it in like just little places where I'm just like, I would love to know the story of this quilt.
You know, speaking of that, I will say one thing I do really enjoy about Crazy Quilts is that a large number of them are dated.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and or signed,
Mhm.
or at least initialed or something like that. So I like that. I guess part of that craze was to date it. I don't
Mhm.
know. I don't know why we got away from that part
Yeah.
of that
Like, yeah,
fervency.
don't put your name and date on some really beautiful thing, but put definitely tell everybody that you made this, awful silk and satin mess.
Yeah, of all the trends to carry on through, I don't know why that wasn't one that stuck. Like,
Yeah. Yeah. But as far as making a crazy quilt block, I am in. I don't know when we shall do it. I do have some things I have to finish before that.
no, that's one. I mean, your Meriwether wax goes all the way through when?
Oh, that's through September. I'm not as concerned about that. I have my Quilt Alliance project that is I can't do any other sewing until that is like buttoned up and put to bed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, after that, I have many projects to jump into. So
Oh, and I've just added to it.
I would say by the time we finish the book, I'll be ready to make a block if
Well,
that's amenable.
okay, okay.
To anybody else, we're gonna force to do it. What did Team Marie said? The price of admission is one quilt block. Yes. Until we can get this channel monetized,
Yeah.
if you want to come, you need to make.
Well, and you know, while you're thinking about your quilt blocks, a reminder for anyone that was late coming in for next week, which is on the 2nd. And don't feel bad if you're going to be away doing fun summer things. We will be here whether you are or not. So the replay will be waiting for you. But we're going to read the section construction through motifs, and that is pages 36 through 81. Don't freak out. It's a crap ton of pictures. It's only about 20 pages of reading, which is usually what I aim for. And that's what we'll be discussing there. And then just as a reminder, our next Needlework Nights is going to be the 3rd. And we're discussing tomato pincushions. And Steph, anything you want to say about your streams?
No, just business as usual with those. I think this Thursday I will probably be finishing the Chintz book. And we're gonna look at some Sunbonnet Sue stuff because yeah, I feel like probably reached the pinnacle of Sunbonnet Sue in my own
Don't
surroundings.
Oh no, I can't believe you just put that out into the universe. Now you're gonna be like inundated with Sunbonnet Sue stuff because you're like,
Oh,
the
I
universe will be
already
like,
am.
Pinnacle? Who are you kidding?
Yeah,
Incoming.
no, I already am. So, and it's all good because, I mean, there's been people that I've been so, thank you so much, but no. But there have also been people that have gifted me things where I'm like, oh my God, thank you so much. So, yeah.
All right, guys. Well, that's gonna do it for us. Again, please make sure that you are liking the video and that you're subscribed to the channel to help us get more views and things like that. We really appreciate it. And I think that's gonna do it for us.
Yeah. Thanks, guys. It is
Thank
wonderful to see you, and I hope to see you on Thursday.
you.
And yeah.
Have a good night. Bye, everybody.